Okay, so can we start with maybe just a very high level view of the energy efficiency special interest group, the sort of activities you get up to, broad aims, objectives?
Well, we're a two-way conduit between the DTA membership and the standards bodies. So I personally sit on the BSI TCT 7.3 committee, and what we do is I go to meetings, which obviously over the last year have been mostly virtual, but from those meetings we discuss various elements to do with mostly the comments that have arisen from other national bodies that are part of the overall JCT1 Working Group 39 relating to the data center standards that we are in the process of creating. What happens is I put the consultation document onto the DTA portal and then notify the members that those documents are there, and then they can look through those documents, and if they want to raise any comments, they raise the comments to me, and then I raise the comments when I either virtual or face-to-face.
Okay, and in terms of data center standards, excuse me, I'm probably not as good at you as remembering all the numbers and names, but there's ISO TS 22237, EN 5600, and ISO 30 or 30134. Those are the main ones on which you are involved?
Those three, plus the EU Code of Conduct for Data Centers Energy Efficiency. So the first one, I'm going to take them in this order. So it's the ISO 30134 are the data center key performance indicators. And there are currently 9 of those. They cover things like PUE, carbon utilization effectiveness, IT energy efficiency metrics for servers. And those have been published as ISO international standards. And to be honest, any data center that's not using the ISO standards to report on and calculate those particular KPI metrics really need to get onto the case and start to do that, because from our discussions with various EU bodies and at national level, things like the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, etc., it's plain to see that these will be required for regulatory reporting in the future. This is a call to arms. Look at those standards, buy them, look at them, understand them, and start publishing and calculating those metrics. The EN 5600 series is the data center design, build, and operate standards, and that's a regional standard, and so it applies in Europe, and that's not just the EU member states, that's 43 odd countries that make up Europe Union and also the allied states. So basically people like Turkey, Belarus, Israel, for instance, would comprise that European standard. And then the technical specification treble 237 actually basically a copy of the EN 5600 series, which has been elevated to ISO level. It's only a technical specification at the moment, but there is work underway to make it a full ISO. So when that happens, then we'll have one global data center design, build, and operate standard, which of course will assist organizations in being able to report those KPI metrics to their wherever government they're located in for the purpose of regulation.
And you mentioned the EU Code of Conduct. Something called Brexit obviously happened a little while ago. Has that had any impact on that, or is the EU Code of Conduct for data centers still apply to the UK as well as everywhere else within the EU? What's the situation there?
Well, the EU Code of Conduct for Data Centers is a voluntary initiative, although I think that in the future, with the alignment with the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, it could become a little bit more hairy to deal with in Europe itself. Obviously, the UK government has to make a decision on what it wants to do with its data center estate and how it moves forward, especially in terms of the net zero commitments that we've made. Technically, there is no reason why UK data centers shouldn't continue to use the EU Code of Data Centers Energy Efficiency because it's a voluntary initiative. I discussed this recently actually with some students on the CNET Masters course with exactly the same question. And I said, well, you know, there is no reason not to use it. It is voluntary. It's a very good series of best practices, and it covers everything you really need to know how to make your data center more energy efficient and sustainable moving forward. And then kind of caveat that with, and after all, it is a UK initiative. You know, it was started in the UK by DEFRA and the BCS, Data Center Specialist Group, in conjunction with the EU JRC. Over, I'd say, at least just under half of all the participants in the EU Code of Conduct are UK data centers. So I think it would be a bit silly to cut your nose off to spite your face when it ultimately using the Code of Conduct will result in less money being spent on energy, which, you know, it has to be a good thing for data center operators. It improves their operational performance, it improves their financial performance. So there's really no reason to stop it or to kind of, you know, discard it, because it's a homegrown product. Basically, it's something that we did for Europe, which has now become very important for data centers moving forward.
And in terms of both that and back to the standards, the sort of creating these metrics, how important do you think it is to have these various benchmarks or objectives towards companies' work, whether it's for individual data centers or the industry as a whole, to sort of work out where it is and you know, where it needs to be?
Well, we're under a great deal of scrutiny from the European Commission. You know, there is a lot of angst within the Commission about data centers and the perception of them being, you know, fire-breathing, energy-gobbling, coal-fired power, you know, power-hungry dragons that are basically sucking up all the power. And of course, you know, at the top level, you've got the overriding Paris Agreement. You know, is trying to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees C by the end of the century. And we've got all of these net zero initiatives in building, you know, and the whole world is effectively decarbonizing. Now, the thing with data centers is that we've got two things that we need to look at. One is that we are in a period of sustained growth. You know, I think the compound annual growth rate for data centers globally is about 18%. And there's data centers being built everywhere. Yeah. So there's obviously an increase in energy and an increase in resource usage to construct and to build and operate those facilities. But at the same time, some of the IT applications that are actually being run out of our data centers are actually contributing to reductions in carbon elsewhere. So if you take, for instance, the pandemic, you know, whereas if I was going to have a meeting with somebody, I would, you know, have to get on the train, go down to London, sit in a room, and discuss all things data centery. Now I can do that online. So if you were to calculate my carbon footprint of jumping on a train, visiting a building which itself has embodied energy and operational energy that's happening, all of that has been replaced by using a digital service, a virtual service. So, and that's just one element of it. You know, you think about there's been a huge increase in home deliveries. Well, you know, if you was to consider an Amazon van or a retailer van going around and basically visiting 20 people in a day and dropping off their shopping, and compare that to 20 households getting in their cars and going to a huge supermarket and buying all their goods and then driving back again. So, you know, you're looking at at least 20 car journeys there and back versus one van doing a round. So, you know, and that's all enabled by technology and data sets. So, yeah, I think, yeah, we have to be mindful of the net zero. We can't be an outlier. We can't be the only group of data centers and people, industry, as it were, that's not looking at the decarbonisation of our activities, full stop.
Yeah, and in terms of some of the other activities you get involved in, maybe energy flexibility, I think you call it, and related to that maybe is the waste heat reuse. I know in mainland Europe, they may be doing more advanced stuff with that than in the UK, but what's the sort of potential there, do you see?
Well, as part of the decarbonisation of the grid and the generation of electricity, I think we need to understand, that traditionally power system has been big generators that pump their energy into the high tension, high voltage lines, which then gets distributed to low voltage lines and then to the consumer or the customer or the data center. When you're decarbonising a grid, it changes the perspective, because now you're putting different generation sources on the grid, such as wind farms, such as solar plants, such as biodigesters, mini hydros, etc. And these are all being connected to the grid. But the grid was never designed for two-way and a greater control at local level. It was designed to be at a high level and only one way. So that gives data centers a huge potential business market by potentially putting in smart, energy flexible, aware UPS systems and on-site generation, and supplementing the grid, basically, in order to decarbonize. So I appreciate that it's difficult for city centre data centres, because they are going to be hit with noise reduction measures. They probably haven't got the space on site. For the larger ones, and for some of the new ones that have been mooted that are out of town or on former industrial sites or in former Ministry of Defence establishments, there's no reason for them not to have their own power station and feed themselves, but also over-engineer it so that they can provide power to the local community or other businesses, which would all be decarbonised. Obviously, these would be new installations, so we can think about using combined heat and power units, fuel cells and hydrogen, for instance, or if they're located, they could have enough sufficient land, they could put a solar farm up or put as many solar panels as they can on their actual buildings themselves. Excuse me. And that kind of takes care of the energy flexibility side of things. And on the waste heat side of things, obviously, the Commission are really, really hot on waste heat. They feel that waste heat from data centres is something that they need to address. In Europe, where they have already got district heating systems, it's relatively easy to retrofit to connect to those district heating systems. There is a kind of geographical point, though. So kind of anywhere south of Paris, the weather conditions that you need in order to justify district heating systems kind of dissipate because the average temperature is higher. There's no reason to think that we couldn't provide hot water solutions from using waste heat from data centers. A lot of people would say, well, air-cooled data centers do not provide heat that's useful. And I would disagree and say, actually, maybe there needs to be a change in your thinking. And if you go to an immersed cooling solution, liquid solution, then you actually are getting higher temperatures, which is more useful and can be used in local hot water grid. And we've worked recently with Euroheat and Power on putting forward a kind of a policy document to the Commission very, very shortly, which details 6 elements. And this was derived from a workshop between data center owner operators and the district heating company and the district heating trade body. That covered things like training, how waste heat is actually treated, because at the moment it's not seen as a renewable energy source. So that may change as a result of this policy document.
Okay, and I'm thinking that I was always struck me that clearly there's a massive legacy data center install base, if you like, and then there's brand new. If you've got a nice big green field, it's quite easy to build a very green data center there, I say, and I saw this morning, Echelon data centers, for example, in Dublin, Ireland, have just got an agreement to have a biogas plant sort of located next door to supply them with energy. So that's easy. If you're in the middle of Docklands, where space is how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of square foot, these things maybe aren't so easy. So how do you sort of balance those different sort of scenarios, I guess?
Yeah, as I said earlier, legacy data centers probably won't be able to get the energy flexibility and waste heat reuse options that newer facilities will have. And you know, there's not really much else I can say about that. Yeah, they're going to be unfortunately kind of cut out from this solution. But there's no reason to say that we couldn't convert from being air cooled into liquid cooled. And if there is a district heating system in their locale, then you know it's probably highly likely in the future that if they're planning on doing any planning alterations or doing a refurbishment, and they have to seek planning permission, there is likely to be a district kind of clause inserted into the planning permission. They will need to connect. So, for instance, I think there's a data center in the Blackwall Tunnel region, which actually has been required to connect to the district system at some point in the future as a condition of planning. But as we speak now, there is no district heating system in the area. But there is one at there's one in the City of London, I think, and I know that there's at least 2 data centres that have been approached to see if they can put their waste heat into the district heating loop there. I think for legacy facilities, there is a kind of what's in it for me kind of thing, and you know, and ultimately, who is going to pay for it? Is it going to be revenue neutral? You know, are we going to put this in that we need to heat pumps, for instance? Who's going to pay for the heat pumps? How do you deal with it contractually? You know, if I'm a component part of a district heating system and I'm one of the heat sources and I basically lose customers or have a customer move out on me or any changes or have a failure, how do you deal with that contractually with the district when you're actually providing any heat? These are all things that the policy document to the Commission wants to be discussed and debated and clarity on how you deal with it. Also a part of that I personally was involved in recently, which is this project, which looks at the models of how you basically monetize the heat from data centers.